Welcome to what I'm calling Theorycrafting Corner, a show where I discuss builds and other theories in Smite, much like one who would discuss bird law. Today we'll be discussing what I'm calling the QCDJ Thor build. It's a build named after the group responsible for Come On and Slam, and Welcome to the Jam, and thusly we will be looking to do just a stupid amount of damage off of Thor's dunk. And I think this build is actually viable. It's not just a meme. So I think that we could plausibly come up with a build that produces a dumb amount of all damage. However, what makes this build so interesting is that it could actually be more than just a meme. So we're not looking for pure dunkage, but also good damage elsewhere. A semi-balanced build at the very least. So here's the build. You'll be starting off with a spicy Mannequin Scepter and a tasty mace. Hidden Mannequin Scepter is the bread and butter of this build. We'll be looking to abuse that 15% HP bonus damage whilst we dunk on the unsuspecting enemy backline. The build is pretty standard to start. Jotun's Transcendence, Hydra's Lament, and then we go for the spice. Grab a Bloodforge and finish with perhaps a surprising Rune Forge hammer. Don't forget to upgrade your scepter to a hidden blade. Let's take a look at the stats. 306 power, 10 flat penetration, 393 flat auto damage, 102 physical protections, 2245 HP. I don't know why I said it that way. Anyways, 40% CDR. Now, let's break down the build. The initial Mannequin's pickup isn't doing anything special for us for now. That's okay. We want it for that massive 15% health damage that Mannequin Hidden Blade provides. Jotun's has 20% CDR, and Mace is just a great starter item for Thor. Trans is going to give us damage and mana. And given how mana hungry Thor can be, this item is huge for us. It's almost core. Hydra's is an item that Thor can utilize very well. Sneaking in Hydra's autos between abilities is pretty natural on Thor and adds an incredible burst to his post-ult slam. Hydra's gives the next auto after an ability 40% extra damage, meaning that our almost 400 damage autos are now slapping for 550. Multiply that by 4 for each ability, and that gives us an extra 600 damage just from having Hydra's Lament. Now here's where the fun begins. Since we're using our ult very aggressively, we need some solid sustain. And that's where that Bloodforge comes in. 15% lifesteal isn't super impressive, but when you add the 400 point shield you get from a kill, I think it maximizes Thor's dive potential here. Plus, the extra 75 power ain't too shabby. Finally, what might be the biggest question mark here, the Rune Forged Hammer. Rune Forge offers a humble 40 power, but also a big 250 health, adding to more survivability. But the passive is massive. Any enemy that is CC'd receives 20% more damage. This is big because any enemy that is currently CC'd takes that damage. This doesn't need to be CC'd by you, so a teammate can set you up. Originally, my thought was to go with Heartseeker or a Titan's Bane, but after crunching the numbers, Runeforged is the clear winner here. If Thor's ult can proc it by itself, meaning that if Thor's stun on his ultimate counts as the CC required to activate Runeforged passive. If it does, then Thor's ultimate can hit for a whopping 1350, provided that the enemy has 3000 hit points and no protections. A very realistic scenario. If not, you're looking at 1300 damage if you instead build Heartseekers, or 1120 damage if you stick with the hammer. This method also relies on Hidden Blade proccing with Rune Forge, because if not, we're looking closer to 1250, which would then make Heartseeker better for Dunk, but not necessarily better for the build. Heartseeker procs for 5% at 400 power, but that requires you to have 400 power. Furthermore, each ability afterwards only does 75% of that bonus damage. So how can we know which item is the best here? Well, for that, we're going to need to test the builds. Testing has yielded some interesting results. Thor's Slam with Runeforge hit the level 20 Odin bot with 0 protections for 753 damage, or 341 damage with 200 protections. The Heartseeker does 388 against 200 protections Odin bot, or 789 with no protections. Wow, that was unexpected. Or was it? But I have deceived you. Waha, ha ha, ha ha. You see, no enemy has 0 protections. So in order to actually calculate the amount of damage we would do, we must use this secret formula. And for that, we must reference the greatest smite encyclopedia known to man. The word of Thoth. 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 Thoth?
Thoth.
The actual formula is damage taken multiplied by 100 over 100 plus protections. So, if we take our rounded 1300 damage, multiply that by a 100 over a 100 plus 200 protections, we have 450 damage. But it still isn't perfect, and that's because we use rough approximations. Each application of damage is subject to protections. What we did is add all the damage together and then calculated it. When in reality, what we should have done is separate the bonus damage from the Medican's Hidden Blade and the ability. So Medican's Hidden Blade does 450 damage to enemies with 3000 health. The ult should be hitting for 657. Now, where the Rune Forged bonus damage applies matters here, which, referencing the word of Thoth, tells us that it applies to the damage taken part of the formula. So 450 times that bonus 20%, 1.2, is going to be multiplied by 100 over 100 plus those 200 protections, giving us 180 actual damage. And 657 times 1.2 times 100 over 100 plus 200 is going to be equal to 262. Now, if we add these two numbers together from the Hidden Mannequin Blade and the ability, we're going to get 442 damage. Closer, but if you remember, we're dealing with about 100 less damage when we tested. So where's the difference? Well, does the ult alone proc Runeforge? Maybe that bonus damage isn't supposed to be there. So if we take 450 from the Hidden Mannequin Blade and then we work out that formula, 450 times 100 over 300 is going to give us 150 damage. And then we take that ability damage, 657, multiply that by 100 over 300, or 1/3, or 0.33. And that's going to give us 219, which brings us to a total of 369. And damn, that does look fine. However, something's still off. Perhaps the Odin bot switch simply adds protections and not sets them, meaning that by using 200 protections, it adds 200 protections. At level 20, Odin naturally has 76 physical protections, and thus by adding 200 of those protections, we get 276. However, we also haven't calculated our whopping 10 flat penetration either. So let's use the full formula. Raw damage times 100 plus bonus damage divided by 100 plus protections multiplied by our percent pen minus flat pen is going to give us our final number. So we'll plug in the data here, and that's going to be 450 times 100 over 100 plus 276 for those protections and minus 10 for the flat penetration, going to equal 122.95, and that's a sort of rounded number. Using that same formula, we get 179.5 for our ability damage, and that is going to give us a grand total of 302 damage. But that looks a little low. If we instead add our Runeforge, we get 147 and 215. So that extra bonus 20%, which will give us a total of 362. Both of those numbers are still off. But what if Madikin's Hidden Blade doesn't get the bonus damage from Runeforge? Well, then we get 215 plus 122 for that Madikin's for a total of 337. However, Thor's ult applies 2 separate damages, one from the dunk and one from the lightning. And if we use this, we get 32 lightning damage plus 186 dunk damage plus the 122 from Hidden Madikin's Blade for a grand total of 340 damage. And that's close enough for me to assume that there's maybe some differencing in the way that I'm rounding numbers and the way that Smite rounds numbers. So I'd say that's exactly how this works. From all this, we can infer that the enemy doesn't have to be CC'd beforehand for the Runeforged Hammer passive to apply, so long as the ability has CC on it. It also tells us that Runeforged passive does not apply to Madikin's Hidden Blade's damage. So the question is now, is Heartward better or possibly even a Titan's Bane here? So if you thought we were done talking about Runeforged, not quite. We're looking for the best burst Thor can apply, not just ulti damage. So it's time for a graph. Hooray! Okay, so after crunching all the numbers, we have a clear winner in Runeforged Hammer. However, there is a caveat to this. Remember that the enemy needs to be CC'd in order for that sweet 20% bonus damage to apply. Generally, this is fine so long as you look to utilize your ultimate to engage in teamfights, which is frankly what this build is for. And honestly, the CC combo timing is a bit tricky. Even with auto cancels, you have about 3 seconds to execute your full combo. Auto attacks and abilities. It's doable, but you have to remember to keep the enemy CC'd. The good news is that your comrades can also CC the enemy and Runeforge will apply, so you're not necessarily subject to having to execute that combo perfectly, although if you've ever played Smite, relying on your teammates is not always the best strategy going into things. While we didn't spend too much time discussing it, having the Bloodforge allows you to fully commit to a target, and when it works, it's absolutely lethal. Backliners don't have a chance. There are probably better items statistically than Bloodforge, perhaps even a Soul Eater could be good. Perhaps even still this build can be optimized even further, but for now I think it's solid. The shield that Bloodforge offers is just so nice to have after you do all that burst damage. One final note. I think what surprised me more than anything was how Heartseeker was the least damaging of the 3 items. I thought for sure Titan's Bane would be worse, but the numbers don't lie. Anyways, that's going to wrap up this episode of Theorycrafting Corner. Don't forget to slam, and welcome to the jam.